Indiana, especially like with their free agents, they're gonna be a great team. But to not have the defending champs on TV more, I think it's kind of crazy.
Caitlin Clark is getting the most nationally televised WNBA games this season, by a mile. And Minnesota Lynx star Napheesa Collier doesn't think that's right. She said as much on ESPN's First Take, essentially questioning why Clark's Indiana Fever have so many TV dates while other teams, even the defending champs, have fewer. This all came on the heels of the WNBA releasing its broadcast schedule, which revealed a jaw-dropping stat. The Fever will have 41 of their 44 games aired nationally, a new record. In other words, virtually every time Caitlin laces up, it'll be on national TV. Many fans and analysts thought this was a no-brainer. Of course, networks want as many Caitlin Clark games as possible. She's ratings gold.
They garner the most viewership.
But as we've seen even before Caitlin entered the WNBA, when she achieves something big, jealousy often rears its head. Collier, as calm and diplomatic as she appeared in the interview, still let her true feelings slip out. In a segment that started off cordial, Napheesa basically said it's crazy how much spotlight Clark is getting. A take that, as we'll see, is pretty bizarre considering some of her other comments in that same interview regarding the WNBA's growth. It's like she wants to have her cake and eat it too, benefit from Caitlin's star power, but also complain about it. Alright, let's break this down and see what's really going on here. And by the way, if you think Caitlin 100% deserves all those national TV games, go ahead and subscribe. You're in the right place. Okay, so here's what happened. The WNBA schedule drops, and it turns out the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark's team, are getting an unprecedented 41 out of 44 games on national TV. A new record. Anyone with a calculator or common sense can figure out why. Last year, Caitlin Clark was an absolute ratings magnet for the league.
The reason why they have more national TV games because 18 of the top 20 most viewed games last year were the Indiana Fever.
That's right. In 2024, the Fever dominated the TV ratings. They weren't just slightly ahead, they had by far the most watched games in the league, setting viewership records and accounting for a huge chunk of the WNBA's total audience. In fact, the Fever's games made up roughly 40 to 45% of the league's total TV viewership last season. To put it another way, one team, led by one superstar rookie, drove nearly half the eyeballs on WNBA broadcasts. Clark's games averaged about 3 times more viewers than other WNBA games. It's insane, but true. So naturally, the TV networks said, we want more of that. If millions of people will tune in for Caitlin, you bet those Fever games will be all over ESPN, ABC, CBS, you name it. More viewers means more ad revenue, which means the network execs are smiling. At the end of the day, it's about money. Broadcasters aren't in the business of charity or fairness. They're in the business of drawing ratings and selling ads. And with the league's new CBA negotiations looming, every WNBA player should, in theory, want the league to put its best face forward and maximize exposure. You'd think they'd all be cheering, yes, showcase the star who brings in the most fans. When you need a game-winning bucket, you give the ball to your best player, the one most likely to score. This is no different. From a rating standpoint, Caitlin is that player for the WNBA. She's the hot hand that can help everyone win by growing the game's audience. Yet, much like a player pouting when they don't get the ball, some WNBA veterans are apparently pouting that Caitlin is getting so much attention, and that sentiment was on full display in this ESPN interview. So, Napheesa Collier went on First Take and was asked about the WNBA's broadcast schedule, specifically if it was fair for the Fever, with Caitlin, to get so many nationally televised games.
Her team is going to have 41 of their 44 games nationally televised, while the reigning champs, the Liberty, only have 32. Was this a fair move by the W?
First, let's clear up a misconception. The question itself was a bit off. It framed the situation as if the WNBA league office was choosing to favor one team. That's not really how it works. The WNBA doesn't unilaterally decide which teams get national TV slots. The broadcast partners, ESPN, ABC, CBS, etc., make those calls because they know which matchups will draw the most viewers and dollars.
In other words,
it wasn't the league playing favorites. It was the TV networks making a business decision.
It's not the WNBA making these decisions unilaterally and going, we're promoting the Fever and Caitlin Clark above everybody else. Their partners are saying, we want Caitlin Clark on the Fever because more people are going to watch, we can sell more advertising.
Wait, first of all, can we just say this right now? The WNBA do not decide who's on TV. be there. They make the deal with the WNBA to get certain amount of games on certain days, and whatever, like, these networks choose who to show. There are multiple times when the Fever play other teams and they have to make a choice, and these networks are going to choose the Fever every single time. And any person at any of these networks that does not choose the Fever should be fired.
Okay, now that we've got that straight, how did Nafisa respond?
I think it's two things. I mean, obviously people want to watch Caitlin play, and so you have to put the people on TV that people want to see. But at the same time, like, there's stars all over the league, and you want good basketball as well. Obviously, Indiana, especially like with their free agents, they're gonna be a great team. But to not have the defending champs on TV more, I think it's kind of crazy. I mean, it doesn't have to be where you're taking games away from Indiana, but I think you can raise the level of TV games for the other teams as well.
Now, Nafisa could have stopped at, "You've got to put on who people want to see," because that right there is the whole story. But it's that next part, the bit about putting good basketball on TV and it being kind of crazy that the Liberty aren't getting more games, that raised eyebrows. Let's unpack that. Yes, the New York Liberty won the title last year, and they're a phenomenal team. They're slated for 32 national TV games to the Fever's 41. Collier's implying that as champs, the Liberty deserve more national exposure, maybe even more than Caitlin's team. But let's do the math. Clark got 41 of 44 Fever games on national TV. To give the Liberty more than that, you'd have to broadcast basically all their games nationally. Is Nafisa saying the Liberty should have every single game on national TV? That's the only way they'd top Caitlin's count. It's just not realistic. And being the reigning champs, while a great accomplishment, doesn't automatically mean you're the biggest draw. Winning is awesome, but entertainment value is something different. Some teams and players are simply more exciting to the general audience. The ratings prove that Caitlin and the Fever were that team last season, the must-see TV every time they played. With the Fever's off-season upgrades, they're expected to be even more electric this year. So on one hand, Nafisa acknowledges you have to put on who people want to see, Caitlin, but in the same breath she balks at the result of that logic. It comes off as contradictory and frankly rooted in ego or hurt feelings rather than facts. Almost immediately, fans and commentators picked up on this. It started a conversation about whether this pushback is about fairness or just feelings. Because from a business perspective, it's obvious.
This is a business. And you want to know what? Caitlin Clark is good business. I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand that. Why is it so hard for you to separate feelings from business? Like y'all make all this money, but y'all don't know how to take care of good business? This is business.
Nafisa wasn't done there, though. Stephen A. Smith, never one to shy away from stirring the pot, followed up with a question that really put things in perspective. He basically brought up Michael Jordan as an example, asking Collier to consider how the NBA handled MJ in his prime.
A dude named Michael Jordan came along. And Michael Jordan came along and he wasn't yet winning championships, but his popularity was so astronomical that the NBA practically marketed everything they could around this guy. So to know that there's an example like that as a shining example to be followed that could benefit the league, particularly down the road, why is that an issue when we've seen that such a marketing plan has worked in the past?
Bingo. Stephen A. framed it as a straightforward business question. And there's no question that back in the day, the NBA leaned all the way in on Jordan's popularity. That's just sports marketing 101. You'd think Nafisa, who's not just a player but also a budding businesswoman, more on that soon, would totally get the value of riding a superstar's wave. Collier co-founded the new offseason 3x3 league Unrivaled and even tried to sign Caitlin Clark to a whopping $1 million contract, plus an equity stake in the league. Why? Because Nafisa knew Caitlin would be ratings gold and help Unrivaled succeed. Collier clearly understands the impact a star player can have on viewership. She bet big on it herself. And yet, after Stephen A.'s Jordan reference, Nafisa doubled down on her stance.
I don't think it's an issue. I do think Caitlin's a star, and like I said, people want to see her, and we are trying to grow the league. Like, you need to put on TV the players that people want to see. But kind of what I said before, I don't think raising the level of the other teams has to mean bringing down Caitlin or the Indiana Fever. They should have those amount of games on TV on primetime, but I think other teams should also have more than what they have.
So naturally, this set people off. Collier had just in so many words deemed it unfair and crazy that Caitlin Clark is hogging the national TV slate. She doesn't have a problem with Caitlyn getting 41 games, she just thinks it's too much relative to everyone else. Remember, nobody is being kept off TV entirely. The Liberty still have 32 games nationally, which is a ton. But the tone of Nafisa's response suggested she felt slighted on behalf of other teams. It struck a nerve because it seemed to ignore reality. Let's call it like it is. What's really driving this pushback is a sense of equity and ego, not actual injustice. Nafisa Collier's viewpoint that the distribution of TV games should be more fair comes from a good place in theory, wanting all teams to shine, but it overlooks how the entertainment industry works. The WNBA and its broadcasters have everything to gain by featuring Caitlyn heavily. And guess what? If some other team or player was the bigger ratings draw, they would have gotten the lion's share of TV time. If Nafisa's own Minnesota Lynx were guaranteed to pull in millions of viewers every night, you can bet those networks would schedule all 44 of their games on national TV in a heartbeat. This isn't personal, it's business. There are only so many broadcast slots that partners are willing to give the WNBA, so they're going to maximize them with the matchups that bring in the most eyeballs. It's really that simple. Collier calling it crazy is ironic, because what's truly crazy would be not capitalizing on a phenomenon like Caitlyn Clark. It's no different than what we saw with teams literally changing arenas to accommodate Caitlyn's popularity. Several WNBA franchises have moved their Fever games to much larger venues, sometimes 2 to 5 times the size of their usual arena, just to handle the ticket demand when Caitlyn comes to town. They did this only for games against the Fever. Why? Because it's dollars and cents. They know those games will sell out and then some. It's the same principle on TV. Collier's stance starts to look short-sighted here. She's so focused on everyone getting equal shine that she's missing the bigger picture. Caitlyn's spotlight actually shines on all players. Clark isn't playing alone out there. Every time the Fever are on national TV, another team is right there with them, playing in front of 1 million+ viewers they might not otherwise get. That's an opportunity for those players to make a name for themselves, to impress fans who tuned in for Caitlyn. The spotlight may center on Clark, but it extends to her opponents. A rising tide lifts all boats if you let it.
This notion that the rest of the WNBA is being slighted, I just think is counterintuitive because the rest of the WNBA is being boosted. I don't know how many different ways I have to say that. I mean, Nafisa Collier, as much as she might have a beef with not being promoted enough, is a much bigger name now than she was this time last year.
Exactly. Collier's premise that other teams play good basketball and therefore would draw just as much if given the chance is flawed. It's not a knock on the quality of other teams. There are plenty of fantastic players and teams in the WNBA. But last season proved that quality alone isn't what brought in record audiences. Storylines and star power did. You can have 2 excellent teams compete, but if one of them features a once-in-a-generation talent with a massive following, that game's going to attract way more casual viewers than, say, 2 equally solid teams without that marquee name. It might not be the most feel-good reality, but it's reality. So Nafisa keeps harping on quality basketball, as if the Liberty or other teams are somehow being disrespected. They're not. They'll still be on TV a lot. It's just that the Fever are on more because the demand for Clark is off the charts. Feelings don't change that fact. Collier's argument, while diplomatically stated, boils down to feelings over facts, and that's why it's falling flat. Because the facts are crystal clear. In 2023, pre-Clark, WNBA viewership and attendance were on a slow, steady rise. Nothing too crazy. Enter Caitlyn in 2024, and the league saw an explosion of interest unlike anything in recent memory. Attendance spiked in arenas around the country whenever the Fever came to town. Remember those arena upgrades for her games. And TV viewership? Through the roof. The Fever routinely topped over 1 million TV viewers per game. By season's end, 22 WNBA games had surpassed 1 million viewers, a record high not seen in over 2 decades. Of those, 19 were Fever games. The Fever's regular season broadcast averaged about 1.19 million viewers, while all the other games averaged around 394,000. That's nearly 3 times more. It's staggering. Consider this, in the WNBA playoffs, usually the deeper rounds, semifinals, finals, draw the most attention. Not so in 2024. Caitlyn's Fever squeaked into the playoffs and played 2 first-round games. Those 2 games drew more viewers than the actual WNBA Finals games. In fact, Clark's last playoff game, Game 2 of the first round, pulled 2.5 million viewers, the largest audience ever for a WNBA game on cable. Meanwhile, Game 1 of the Finals drew about 1.1 million. So yes, a first-round matchup outdrew the championship. If that doesn't tell you the kind of gravity Caitlin has, nothing will. Now, Nafisa's own off-season venture, Unrivaled, gives us another telling data point. Collier's 3-on-3 Unrivaled League had a lot going for it. WNBA stars like Brianna Stewart, Courtney Vandersloot, Collier herself. It secured a TV deal with TNT and streaming on Max. Opening night viewership peaked at a respectable 364,000 viewers, a record for a women's game on that network. Not bad. But as the novelty wore off, many games drew far fewer eyeballs. Some broadcasts struggled to even crack six figures in viewers. The entire Unrivaled season averaged about 221,000 viewers on TNT True TV. It turns out, despite featuring many of the W's biggest names, the league didn't capture mainstream attention. It wasn't horrible by any means. It's an inaugural season after all. But it wasn't anything extraordinary either in terms of viewership. Now, imagine if Caitlin Clark had played in Unrivaled. It's not a stretch to say those numbers would have tripled, at least, on her name recognition alone. Collier and her partners certainly thought so. They were ready to pay Clark over $1 million for just a 3-month stint. Ultimately, Caitlin declined the offer to focus on the WNBA. She's loyal like that. But the point is, everyone knows she's a difference maker for ratings. Even Nafisa knew it, which is why her complaint about the Fever's TV time feels so contradictory. With all this evidence, it's hard to see Collier's "it's crazy she has the most games" stance as anything but emotional. The facts overwhelmingly support that Clark earned those slots by transforming the league's visibility in one season. Here's where things get really interesting. And a bit funny, if we're honest. Earlier in that same First Take interview, before the TV schedule talk, Nafisa Collier spoke about the upcoming WNBA collective bargaining agreement. For context, the Players' Union has opted out of the current CBA, meaning they'll renegotiate a new one soon. The timing isn't coincidental. They did it because of the surge in popularity the league experienced. Since, you guessed it, Caitlin arrived, the players see the league growing, and understandably want a bigger piece of the pie. Some players, like LSU star-turned-WNBA rookie Angel Reese and Collier herself, have even floated the idea that they're willing to strike if they don't get what they consider fair in this new deal. That's a strong stance, and it has made a lot of fans nervous. Nobody wants to see momentum halted by a work stoppage. When pressed on this, Nafisa did not back down 1 inch.
I think we're in a great position. I mean, as you guys have seen, the sport is just exploding. I mean, you saw it with the viewership in the WNBA last year, with Unrivaled this year. Like, people are tuning in. And so I think we're in a really great position where we have all the leverage as players right now. We have the most leverage we've ever had as WNBA players, and we have to use it to our advantage. Like, the time for change is right now, and so we have to take advantage of it.
Now, first of all, a quick reality check. It was cute of Nafisa to lump in Unrivaled there as if it had massive ratings. It didn't. Nice try. The real kicker was her saying players have all the leverage. That phrase sent social media into a frenzy, and not in the way Collier would have hoped. People were quick to point out a couple of things. For one, despite record audiences, the WNBA as a business is still finding its footing. Reports indicate the league operated at a loss of about $40 million in that very season of peak viewership. Yes, the most watched WNBA season ever still wasn't profitable enough to avoid 8-figure losses. So folks on the internet questioned, what leverage is she talking about if the league is losing money? It's not like owners are swimming in profit. They're investing in growth, hoping the revenue catches up to the popularity. One post summarized it. WNBA just lost $40 million with the most viewers ever. What leverage is she referring to? Then there was the obvious irony. Collier championing rising viewership as a bargaining chip, then practically in the next breath complaining about the very phenomenon, Caitlin's exposure, that caused those numbers to rise. Another YouTuber put it perfectly. Yes, use the leverage, and then complain about the only player that brings in millions of viewers being on TV too much. Oof. That one had to sting, because it encapsulates the contradiction in Nafisa's stance. And that comment is incredibly important. Nafisa is out here talking about how attendance and viewership have skyrocketed, but carefully avoids saying why. She doesn't mention the Caitlin Clark factor at all, even though deep down she knows it. How can we be so sure she knows? Because again, she personally tried to sign Caitlin to her league for $1 million. You don't do that unless you recognize this player's unique draw. Collier and every player in the WNBA saw what happened in 2024. Caitlin turned the league into front-page news. Yet on First Take, Nafisa spoke in generalities like, "We've earned more because the league is growing." The truth is the players are negotiating on the back of what Caitlin generated. She is the engine that turbocharged the WNBA's popularity in the past year. The players collectively are hoping to benefit from that, which is fine, that's how it works. But it's disingenuous not to credit the driver of that growth. At the end of the day, it does come off as ego and pride creeping in. I understand where Nafisa is coming from to an extent. No one wants to feel like their league is a one-woman show, and the WNBA can't survive long-term by focusing on only one player. The goal is to grow all teams, all markets. But last time I checked, whenever the Fever play on national TV, there's another team sharing that stage. Those opponents are getting in front of huge audiences, many of whom may be first-time viewers who tuned in for Clark. That is invaluable exposure for everyone involved. Perhaps instead of grumbling, players should seize the opportunity. If you're playing against Caitlin on a nationally televised night, make it count. Put on an amazing show for that sold-out crowd and those fans at home. Give the casual viewer something to remember you by, so maybe they stick around as a WNBA fan even when Caitlin's not on the screen. In other words, convert those Caitlin casuals into outright WNBA fans. This is the way.
It is answers like these that show that the WNBA literally lived off charity of the NBA for 25 years. Like, the WNBA is in a position where it's going to grow. And the only reason this league will not grow is because of the players and the old media.
The truth is plain. Caitlin Clark is a phenomenon, and she's presenting an opportunity that comes along maybe once in a generation. Until the players collectively start working as one unit, setting aside personal pride, recognizing the position they're in, and accepting who's driving this surge, these jealous-sounding takes based on feelings rather than facts will only alienate fans. The WNBA has a ton of goodwill and new interest right now, but if the public senses infighting or ungratefulness toward what's fueling the growth, they could be turned off. And if it actually came to a strike, those fans could turn off entirely. Momentum is a delicate thing. It can vanish quickly if mishandled. Still here? Drop a basketball in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.